All right, welcome to the webinar, The Future of the Digital Experience. Since Corp is a leading professional services firm focused on transforming organizations and government agencies for the digital era. We deliver tailored solutions to help clients solve their most complex challenges and maximize potential. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Michael Daney. Michael is the Transformation Practice Director at Sense Corp, and he has extensive experience leading operational and digital transformation programs across a number of industries, including energy, manufacturing, telecom, and financial services. All right, thanks for attending today. We're going to go ahead and get started. Michael, I'm going to pass it to you.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you joining today's webinar. I'm really excited to talk about transforming businesses for the digital era, which is kind of the tagline that Kelly started us with. One quick note from me. I do want to try to make this as interactive as we can. A little difficult in webinar fashion, but I'm going to ask a few questions throughout. Just go ahead and use the chat function when I ask those questions to type in your thoughts. Would really like to get your input on a few things as we're going through this. So, I was thinking it's the end of January, and this time is the time of year for New Year's resolutions and strategies and operating plans. It also, for folks like me with a sweet tooth, is a time of year known as Girl Scout cookie season. So every January and February, I admit that I become a little bit of a cookie monster and eat far more cookies than I should. And I hadn't really thought much about it since last year until I noticed recently that Girl Scouts are now selling their cookies on GrubHub. I saw this article a few weeks ago and it really caught my attention. The backstory is that in light of the pandemic and the fact that the Girl Scouts can't really camp out in front of retail stores and malls anymore, and it's tougher to sell cookies to parents, coworkers, and all that good stuff, they had to adapt and find a new model, a new approach for selling their cookies. I did a little bit of research and found that they've actually been selling cookies since 1917. So more than 100 years, they've been selling cookies. And while the flavors have changed over that time, the basic business model hasn't, right? The basic business model has been make cookies, ship them out all across the country to Girl Scout troops in all 50 states and beyond, and rely on them to sell their inventory of cookies via those traditional face-to-face models. So in that whole time period, they'd been using basically the same model. Well, COVID-19 came along and like most things, completely disrupted the Girl Scout cookie business model. And so they had to adapt. They had to adapt to changing customer needs and the way that folks wanted to order and acquire their cookies. They had to adapt to completely different circumstances in a way that would still work with their model. In this case, the Girl Scout cookies, being transported throughout the country, and stuck to their core value proposition. And so, as I was looking at this, I was thinking, in many ways, the Girl Scouts are having to deal with a new order of business. And that's what our new ebook is all about, right? Our new ebook, called The New Order of Business, talks about how 2020 will define our 2030 world. More to the point, how will the changes that really came so suddenly last year as a result of the pandemic, how will they change businesses, consumer interactions, so much of what we've known and come to expect? How will they change those over the next 5, 10 years and beyond? And we talk about this concept of a frictionless, digitally connected customer experience. I'm a consultant, so I use a lot of fancy words stitched together. But what that really means is, customers are expecting more. They're expecting more personalization. They're expecting faster response times, higher quality. The customer needs have changed. And businesses and industries are now being asked to respond to those changing needs. COVID did not start this, right? COVID just poured fuel on the fire. This has been happening for decades with the rise of the internet, the rise of digital capabilities, and this shift in our economy of customer expectations, more competition, more disruption. This is not new, but it's certainly accelerated as a result of what's happened in the last 12 or 15 months. And so, sometimes when we do webinars, they're very prescriptive, right? We'll say, hey, here's 10 steps to set up Snowflake. Here's 8 steps to go configure your new Salesforce environment. Today is not one of those webinars. Today is not one of the how-to guides. Rather, my goal today is to get you thinking a little bit, get your creative juices flowing about what this shift in our economy means. What do we mean by the new order of business? What are some examples in other industries with technology and data leaders where others have embraced the changing customer needs, the rise of data and digital capabilities to really deliver exceptional customer experiences? What does that look like? And how might I be able to incorporate that into my business and into my business model? So I'm going to be talking about examples from different industries, different sectors and types of businesses, again, to give us some examples of where to start as we think about this journey. I would love it. We'll do our first poll question here. If just using the chat function, if you could give me an example of maybe a few places where you have noticed digital disruption recently, right? In the last year, even as a consumer, outside of your work, have you noticed any key examples where your experience, your interaction has been different with a business or entity you're interacting with because of the rise of digital or some of those kind of changes? I'd love some examples if you'll type them in the chat box. As you're doing that, I'll give you an example from my life. My brother has lived all around the world, and he's lived in some big cities where he grew accustomed to grocery delivery. And for a long time, he said, Michael, why are you not using grocery delivery? And I said, oh, no, I like to pick out my own avocados. That was always my answer. Like, I got to pick out the perfect avocado if I'm going to make good guacamole. I don't want someone else picking it out. And it's kind of an ongoing joke. Every time we'd see each other, it'd say, why are you not doing grocery delivery? And I'd use the avocado example. Well, COVID came along and I realized that what I valued from my grocery store had changed. I didn't quite care as much about how ripe the avocados were or not. And I cared a lot more about my safety and not going into a grocery store once a week and potentially exposing myself to coronavirus. And so I Googled HEB grocery delivery, right? I live in Texas, so I'm a big fan of the Texas-based grocer HEB. And I came to know and love their digital experience, their online application or online ordering capabilities and their delivery model. And I see Ned even commented here about more retail offering grocery and takeout delivery. And so as a customer, what I expected from the business changed. And in that case, HEB was well prepared. I'm actually going to talk more about them as an example later today. They understood the customer needs and they had done the process and technology and data work to support it. So other examples here I see, right? Online learning portals like Schoology, that's a great example. Virtual healthcare, we're seeing major changes there. And we talk about some of these very examples that you've called out. I appreciate everyone sharing. We talk about them in the ebook. The restaurant industry is fascinating to me. You look at the rise of things like cloud kitchens, right? Who would have thought about that 5 or 10 years ago? Certainly food delivery. I know Ned mentioned that. Food delivery has certainly risen in popularity in the last year or two. So we're seeing a lot of changes in that space. In education, right? More online learning platforms and capabilities, leveraging virtual reality to give folks kind of real-time views into things that might be thousands of miles from them, but giving them more of that online VR education capability. Even micro learning, something some of you may be familiar with, a major rise in this idea of kind of just-in-time targeted learning capabilities. We're finding a lot of value in this with the trades and with things like kind of more manufacturing and maintenance type roles, where you can deliver that nugget of knowledge that reinforces previous education just in time to drive that business value for the customer. So education has certainly changed. I mean, who 12 months ago would have thought that kindergartners would be on Zoom and kind of paying attention, at least? A lot of change and disruption there. And then the other one that I think Andrea mentioned was healthcare and health and wellness, right? I had a doctor's appointment a few weeks ago, and it took all of 8 minutes using my phone for a video chat, talked through it, gave me a prescription, solved the problem. That otherwise would have taken probably 2 hours out of my day to drive across town, go wait in the waiting room, see the doctor, go through all that stuff. And so a lot of change in the telehealth space. And even from a wellness perspective, think about the power of wearables, right? I've got my Fitbit on here to make sure I get all my steps in today. But those are examples where different industries are embracing the power of digital to deliver a new experience for customers that not only delights the customer, but candidly also probably results in more efficiency for the business itself. The other example here that I'm going to come back to later is the Peloton. So I'm sure at least a few of you have a Peloton set up in your house, and that has really given rise to kind of an anytime, anywhere model for working out in a more social setting. And so, remember that. I'm going to come back to that later and use that as an example that we could leverage across other industries. So you see all this stuff in education and restaurants and health and wellness. And I kind of describe this as the cool, fun, sexy stuff, right? Like wearable technology and VR. And I always like to joke, it's like aliens and robots taking over the world. That stuff's all cool. But the natural question is, what does it mean for me, right? What does it mean for me, my industry, my business? And I looked at the registration list for today and saw we've got folks from manufacturing, healthcare, fleet management, telecom, oil field services, a wide array of industries. And the fact of the matter is that even though some of those industries might be a little bit behind, or it might not be as obvious that they're embracing digital disruption, it's happening. No matter what industry or organization you're coming from, I guarantee you this is happening in your space. You think about some of the digital oil field capabilities, how we're leveraging data and digital in a construction environment, even agriculture, right? That's one that doesn't immediately come to mind, but the way that some of the large ag players are more intelligently and proactively leveraging data to manage their growing, their supply and their supply chain, really interesting stuff. And so again, I want to open it up for another poll question. I'd love it if you could just put in the chat your industry, just put, hey, I'm from healthcare or manufacturing or whatever the case may be, and give me an example of where you might be seeing digital disruption in your industry. So just take a few minutes here. Would love any examples you're seeing in your day-to-day work around digital disruption. Yeah, so Tim chimed in around software. He's in the software space, and he said digitization in the office of finance. Great example. I spent a lot of time working with finance executives talking about what is the new generation of a finance organization look like, right? We're shifting from kind of the old world of tracking business activities and value created to actually being a value creation part of the business that requires different technologies and capabilities to do it. So if you think about getting smarter with leveraging robotic process automation in the AR and AP space, or leveraging AI algorithms to more intelligently forecast, right? All that stuff is happening in the finance group. That's a great example. I see some good manufacturing examples here. Oil and gas, right? Great example. Something we're doing a lot of work in is that preventative maintenance, right? How do you shift from a more reactive maintenance model with your units or your assets to a more predictive and really kind of reliability centered maintenance model where you're optimizing how often you're going and touching that unit, how you're bundling maintenance activities into a single visit. Great examples in the oil and gas space, and we'll touch on that a little bit more today as well. I see retail home improvement, online ordering, and curbside delivery, no doubt. That's a big piece. And nonprofits in higher ed. Yeah, I see a virtual gala. That's something that I don't think any of us thought we'd be doing a year or two ago, but I know we're all looking for ways to stay engaged in supporting these organizations. And so they've had to adapt their fundraising and giving models as well. So great examples. Again, thank you for chiming in with those thoughts. The takeaway here is it's happening everywhere, right? The question is not if digital is going to disrupt my industry, it's how. And so for us, for all of us in our roles and in our businesses, the question is, how can I be successful? How can I disrupt so as not to be disrupted? How can I get ahead of this? And in our ebook, we highlight 7 key considerations or topics for embracing this new order of business and helping transform your business for the digital era. You can probably tell already, I like to talk a lot. I didn't think I could fit 7 buckets worth of content into an hour. So I went ahead and cut it down to just 5. Would love to talk about the other 2 offline if you want to learn more about agile delivery approaches or personalization. But I think these 5 are particularly relevant for all of us as we think about this new order of business. And the considerations start with a really crisp vision and plan, building a clear and compelling vision and roadmap. The second thing I'm going to talk through is how to be a data leader, what the importance of the data is in this broader digital universe. We're then going to shift and talk about 3 things that are fundamentally business strategy questions, right? They require technology to achieve them, but these are strategic business considerations around your value chain, right? Where is the value for your customers and for your business? And how might you unbundle and rebundle in a way that's advantageous for you as you continue to grow? How can you leverage platforms, or how can you create platforms? I'll talk some about this concept of a platform economy, what that means, and how we can lean into it. And then lastly is location and event independence. This kind of ties back to the Peloton example of the anytime, anywhere model. So I'm going to jump right in and start with vision. We often tell our clients, vision first, plan second, execute third. Everybody's hungry to execute, right? It's just the nature of things. We all want to get to building and delivering and touching and feeling. But the fact is that on a digital journey, skipping the steps around visioning and planning would be a recipe for disaster. Digital transformation requires a clear vision. And it's not the kind of thing you can or should do in an hour-long meeting with a few executives. Visioning requires really deep, intensive user research, design thinking approaches. It takes things like customer journey mapping, employee journey mapping, right? What does this mean for folks within my business as we think about designing a new operating model and new capabilities? Um, the the vision really is what roots your journey and gives you a north star of sorts. Uh, I think this quote from Steve Jobs is so relevant to this conversation. And honestly, who better to look to on the topic of digital disruption than Steve Jobs? He said, if you're working on something exciting that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed. The vision pulls you. The vision pulls you. So, why is that so important in digital transformation? These things are hard, right? If you look at the stats, a 2017 McKinsey study, and certainly this is outdated, 4 years down the road, but it found that 3 out of 4 digital transformation projects failed, right? 3 out of 4. And so if you're going to embark on a challenging, expensive, risky journey, you better have a clear and compelling vision to rally around so that when things get tough, when you're making decisions about scope and timeline and cost, you can all rally around that common vision and say, that's our success criteria. What do we need to do? What decisions do we need to make to deliver that vision for our business and for our customers? I think back to an example in the commercial real estate space. A client partner of ours saw that they were falling behind in the industry from a customer experience and technology perspective, and they knew they wanted to catch up and ultimately become a market leader. But before they could get into the technologies and the actual project work, we spent a lot of time talking with them about vision, right? What's this going to mean for your internal users across different departments? How's it going to optimize and change processes? What's it going to mean for your end customers in all segments? And ultimately, what aspects of our value chain are we really trying to optimize? That has to become our vision that drives everything else. And so we spent a lot of time with them doing the user research, the customer research to define that vision of what the future could look like, right? What would this mean for our customers? What would it mean for our sales team, for the back office, for our IT group? And this probably went on for 4, 6, 8 weeks. Design is inherently an iterative process. If you force it too fast with too few voices, you're going to miss the mark. And so it's really critical. If there's a takeaway from this section, it's really critical to get the right voices in the room, to iterate on it, to refine that vision, and get to what we call the placemat view, right? This is our placemat view in this example, that everyone has kind of on their bulletin board by their desk. And if a stranger walked in off the street and said, what's the deal with your digital transformation program? They would hold up that vision and say, this is what we're trying to do. This is our North Star. Then and only then do you start building out a roadmap and a plan. And only after you've got that plan, that business case, that clear and compelling vision, do you shift into execution. So again, focus heavily on that vision. It can feel like an upfront step you might want to skip over, but it is so critical. And the other thing that can be a mindset shift is that many of us are now focused on creating product as opposed to defining a project. I don't mean product in a physical sense. I mean the experience we are delivering for our customers, our employees. That is a product we are cultivating. And so we need to treat it like a product in the way that we design it and ensure that it's meeting the user's needs. So shifting ahead, I'm going to talk next about data and the value of being a data leader. If you go look each day online or in publications about technology, you'll see a lot of content about technology transformation and digital disruption. And for good reason. That's the surface level stuff we all see. But the fact is, it's the data that really should be the focus of any efforts around digital. If you're thinking about shifting into e-commerce, if you're getting questions about how to improve your experience and create a better omni-channel customer experience, if you're thinking about platform selling or personalization or automating some interactions between you and your vendors or suppliers, all of that stuff boils down to the data, right? In the new order of business, data needs to be at the center of your universe. And why do I say that, right? There's this misconception sometimes that the technology is the shiny object. The technology is just the front end. It's just the surface level. The value and the challenges, candidly, are in the back end data. Think about Uber. I think Uber is a great example here. Their actual application is not that complicated. No disrespect to the software engineers that built it out. I mean, great job. It's a great user experience. But the heart of Uber's business is all the back-end data. It's the data capture around customer usage and trends. And then it's what they're doing with that to get smarter about where they might need more drivers. It also helps them get smarter about moving into adjacent industries. If you think about Uber Eats that I flashed up earlier, the reason it was so easy for Uber to move into that space was because they already had the platform, and more importantly, they already had the data. I can't be on this topic and not talk about Alibaba, right? They practically own their consumers at this point because of how much data they've collected across the customer lifecycle. And so for many of us in the B2B space and in other industries, the question is, how do we leverage data as a strategic asset in a way that enables some of these digital experiences that our customers or our suppliers might actually see, and also generates value for us as the business? I think it's kind of like building a house, right? The digital stuff is the house, but you don't want to be building it on a crumbling foundation. And so if you're hearing words like customer experience, digital experience, mobile application, and you're not hearing words like data governance, data literacy, master data management, that's a red flag. That's a red flag that you're not thinking about the holistic solution. You're only thinking about kind of that front end component or experience. One of our client partners in the manufacturing and distribution space, I think, is a masterclass example of how to do this, right? We've been partnering with them over a few years on their digital journey. And the end goal is to deliver a better e-commerce experience for their customers. But they knew, and we knew, they couldn't start there. They couldn't start with the front end because this organization had grown via acquisition, like many of our companies. And because of that, their back-end data picture was a mess. And so as we laid out that business case and that vision that we talked about, the placemat, the vision, didn't say anything about data. But to make that a reality, we knew there was a lot of work to be done around data consolidation, data cleansing, improving the organization's even literacy around how they talk about, think about, and make decisions around data. And so now they're past that foundational work, and we're really moving into the cool kind of front end stuff around e-commerce. It's going to be lower risk, lower cost, and they're going to be better results because they took that first step, right? They focused on the data and ensure that they're building their house on a solid foundation. And so the takeaway here is strive to be a data leader. Don't let data get lost in the broader digital transformation picture. That's really when you'll run into challenges, and it's where you might be inadvertently sacrificing value. And value is where I want to go next, right? I want to talk about the value chain and this idea of unbundling and rebundling your value chain. I think it's easy sometimes to think um, about kind of boiling the ocean and reinventing your whole business for the digital age in this new order of business. That's very daunting, right? And candidly, it's not the right way to go about it. The right way to go about it is to examine your business, examine your value chain, and say, where am I creating value? Where am I truly creating value for my customers, my suppliers, and for my organization? And where am I not? And for the interactions, for the places in your business model where you are, those are the things you highlight, right? You circle and you say, these are the things I need to invest in. I need to invest in digitally reimagining them, improving them, optimizing them, so that I'm creating experiences that delight and truly generate more value for my business and my customers. If it isn't, if it's an aspect of your business that is legacy that you're stuck with, or it's a piece that you do because you've always done it and it has always seemed logical that that's a part of the industry in which you work, those are the things to circle in red and say, could we automate this and kind of get rid of any continued manual investment in it? Could we offload it? Could we look to a partner or someone else to do this work so that we can focus on the core value prop of our business? And I think a great place to look on the topic of bundling is ironically cable, right? So I think when we hear the term bundle, we either think of asparagus if we're healthy eaters or cable if we're couch potatoes. I fall into the second bucket. And this concept of bundling channels, and I think we're seeing massive change there. But I want to zoom out and just talk about the industry in general, right? If you look at the advent of streaming services like Netflix and what that's done to the traditional cable model, that is a perfect example of digital disruption. And I think the kind of the easy button analysis is Netflix came along, they were the cool disruptor, cable was too slow to react, and that's the disruption story, right? There's some truth to that. But I think a more nuanced and more interesting way to look at it, as we're talking today, is to look not just at Netflix and the cable companies, but also to look at HBO. And I'll explain why here in a second. The old model was you had content companies creating, producing, and aggregating. And then you had the cable companies that were serving and delivering that content. That model worked for a while. But as new players came into the space like Netflix, they kind of blew this up. And they kind of said, hey, we don't need to split it this way. Here are the parts of the value chain where we want to play, right? We originally, right, Netflix focused on the kind of the DVDs they were mailing out, but pretty quickly pivoted to the streaming service. They said, we want to focus on online streaming at a low cost, and the recommendations engine became their early differentiator, right? Enabling that personalized experience. Over time, they've expanded into other parts of the value chain around content creation and production. And that's been a huge boon for them in their growth. The cable companies kind of had to react to that, and in some cases did it a little bit slowly. But if you think about not just the head-to-head, but think about a player like HBO, I think it hammers home the point that these are not technology decisions. These are business strategy and value decisions. Each of the three examples, Netflix, HBO, and the traditional cable players, they made a different calculation on their core value prop. And they've then been designing a value chain and a business model and a digital experience around their vision and their strategy, right? Netflix said, we're going to focus on streaming, limiting commercials, cutting costs. We're now shifting into this content creation space, but we're really focused on that online experience. And as such, they've built their whole model from A to Z around delivering an exceptional online experience. The traditional cable players, on the other hand, they kind of had to react to some extent to streaming. And they've done that to varying degrees if you look at things like the Peacock service. But they've also looked to other areas to kind of create value for them and their customers. Namely, right, the internet services. The obvious thinking was if folks are shifting to streaming, we should maximize the profit we're generating off of our internet services that are a dependency. But in some cases, they're also looking at adjacent industries for growth, right? Spectrum has shifted into the mobile space. They're saying, hey, I'm making the value calculation that I don't want to go try to beat Netflix at their own game. I want to play a little bit in that space, but I think there's huge value opportunity for me here. And HBO is interesting because in some ways they're kind of playing both games, right? HBO has said, for us, we're trying to focus on content quality, status symbol, branding. Our price is higher, right? That's part of establishing a premium brand. And so if you kind of look at this chart along the bottom, it's saying, here are the levers that HBO is pushing and pulling. Here are the ones that Netflix is focused on versus traditional cable players. They're all playing different games. They're not necessarily trying to beat each other at exactly the same components. So what's the takeaway here? The takeaway is, in the old world, whatever industry you were in, you kind of played by those rules. In the new world, those rules are gone. You can pick and choose which pieces of your value chain you lean into, and you can maximize the value for you and your customers in those segments of the value chain versus trying to be everything to everyone. Each of these entities is profitable in their own way, and it's because they've taken that step of thoughtfully assessing their value chain and working to maximize it and building technology and data capabilities that are really targeted around that core vision. So I think Netflix is a great transition point to this idea of the power of the platform, right? So I think we're all hearing more and more about the platform economy. And what does that mean, right? We think about some traditional technology players like an Uber, Netflix, Airbnb. They've built this platform that they're using to basically connect supply and demand to capture user data and use that to improve the types of products or services they're offering. The concept of the platform economy also kind of ties back to the Girl Scouts example earlier, right? The Girl Scouts weren't in the business of being a delivery service and ordering service. They looked to an external platform to partner with and found value for both entities in that way, such that they're both winning in the respective games that they're playing. And so if you think about the platform economy, the value there is just in connecting the supply and demand, right? It's that core value unit is production and consumption being connected. More to the point, the power of the platform is it enables us to shift from this push-based model to more of a pull-based model. So push-based model says you produce X number of widgets based on your production capacity and your forecast. Then you kind of throw it at the market and you hope that you can sell it. That worked okay when we were really sharp around our forecasting. When our markets were more geographically limited, it was easier to forecast effectively. Now, as we've gone through globalization and folks aren't just looking in their neighborhood or their city to purchase products and services, they're not just looking in their city or their state to acquire talent, right? As the rules have changed, so too has the concept of forecasting demand. And so platforms enable us to connect more suppliers and consumers together in a way that smooths that supply and demand curve and limit some of the exposure that we otherwise would have if still using a traditional push-based model. It kind of helps you get better at that matchmaking aspect of the business model. And I think Uber and Airbnb are great examples here where they're just connecting. And the value for them, again, is in capturing data that they can then use to make their ecosystem and their platform more valuable for themselves and for their customers. So as we think about this idea of the power of the platform in a B2B space and in some of the industries that we've talked about earlier today, I think a great example is the industrial Internet of Things, or IIoT, right? So particularly in the kind of asset intensive industries like oil field services and manufacturing, IIoT is the concept of putting sensors onto your assets so that you can monitor in real time what's happening with pressures, temperatures, activity within the unit. And so with that in mind, a lot of companies have built out IIoT platforms where they're pulling that data in, mining it for analytics and insights, and spitting that back out in a way that generates value. So really cool concept, fits perfectly into this idea of a platform. The challenge is most companies aren't doing it well. So there's an Oliver Wyman study that showed, and this is even a few years old, but they showed that there were, I think, more than 200 IIoT platforms out there on the market, and that very few of them were actually adding value for their customers. So why is that? Well, if you dig a little deeper, the challenge is that most of those platforms were trying to do too much in terms of the use cases and the capabilities. So if you look at like GE, right, great example of a company that has historically acquired different companies and technologies. They acquired a tool called Predix that was supposed to play in this IIoT space. But like many others, it was too broad, it was too clunky, and GE was held back by kind of the technical debt of the platform that they had built. Meanwhile, some of these startups were coming to the market and really delivering value rapidly from an IIoT platform perspective. What they were doing was they were being really crisp around the vision, the customer need, and the use case they were trying to solve. And by doing that, they built an experience, they built analytics and insights that were actually moving the needle for their customers. So two takeaways here for all of us as we think about this platform economy and what it means for our businesses. One is figure out if you actually want to be in the platform business or if you just want to leverage the power of the platform, right? You might have homegrown technologies or capabilities that you can commercialize as a platform, and that could be a new source of revenue or value generation for your business. But you also could look to external partners, to platforms coming from competitors, from others in adjacent industries, and look to see if there's opportunities to leverage those platforms to build up your own capabilities and your value proposition. So as it said on the previous slide, you can get in the platform business or you can leverage platforms, but whatever you do, just recognize the power of the platform. And if you're going to dive into that space, be specific and targeted about the use cases that you're leaning into and leveraging. So the last thing I want to talk about, the last of our 5 topics, is around the idea of location and event independence. I think an easier way to say it is this anytime, anywhere model. And this is really the foundation of that frictionless digital customer experience that I mentioned at the start of the conversation, right? Anytime, anywhere means your business is kind of open 24/7, whether you realize it or not. It means that you're not limited to customers in your geography, because you might be able to sell to customers around the country, around the globe, leveraging new digital technologies. There's a couple of nuances to this that I think are really important. One is really focused on that location independence, right? And the idea that you need to be focused on that last mile of delivery. What I mean by that is, it used to be that you focused on what you were producing, how you were pricing it, how you were selling it, and your customers had to come to you. In the new world, you sometimes have to go to your customers, right? So think about like glorified pizza delivery driver, right? The value for Pizza Hut is not just in the pizzas they're making, it's also in the fact that they deliver it to the customer's doorstep. How might that show itself in your industry? Perhaps you'd never thought before about that last mile, but it could be hugely valuable to your customers and in fact could lock them into you as their strategic supplier of products and services if you go that extra mile in getting the products and services to them. I mentioned Pizza Hut. I read recently that they're actually testing drone delivery in Israel, to take pizzas on a drone, take them from a Pizza Hut location to a central parking lot in different parts of the cities, and then have the pizza drivers pick them up there and take them that last leg to the home. Think about what that could mean in other industries. It could be a huge value driver for us as we think about kind of taking value to the customer versus asking them to come to us. The other key piece is around talent, right? So it used to be that if you needed talent for your business, you posted a job and you looked in the cities in which you were based for talent that could come into a physical office and do the job. I think one big takeaway from COVID is maybe that's totally the wrong way to think about it. Maybe I should just be looking for talent anywhere and looking for ways to acquire that talent and collaborate with them via virtual tools just like Zoom. Maybe it's not as important to me anymore that they be physically in an office. And I think even more interesting than that is how could we leverage digital technologies to put expertise on the edge? How can we put expertise in all the right places at the right time without physically having experts everywhere? You might be saying like, Michael, what do you mean by that? Well, let's go back to the Peloton example, right? I mentioned that earlier. And I don't have a Peloton, but it seems like everyone around me does. They're all the rage. And as I understand it, you can ride anytime, day or night, and you can ride alongside others around the world and be connected via the digital capabilities. So it feels like you're riding in real time with other people. It used to be that you had to say, hey, let's meet at 10 a.m. on Saturday. We're going to meet at this location. We're going to ride 30 miles. That's kind of out the window now because of what the Peloton is enabling in terms of connecting you anytime, anywhere. Now, what might that mean in more traditional industries? Well, let's go back to the field service example and specifically oil field services, where assets are typically spread out over huge geographic expanses. You know, it used to be that you would say, we're going to have an experienced technician on call in each of these geographies around the country, such that if a unit goes down or there's a maintenance issue, we can send that person out day or night. That meant we had to pay folks, experienced folks, to be on call in the middle of the night all over. What if you could take the Peloton model? What if you could have one expert on the night shift sitting in their home, connected via technology like Zoom or something more sophisticated, and you could have less experienced technicians stationed around the country? Then when a call comes in the Northeast, you could dispatch the less experienced, cheaper technician to the unit and have the person kind of at home base, so to say, the expert, talking to that technician on site in real time and collaborating with them to solve the problem. From a cost perspective, you're lowering your cost because you don't need the same level of experience everywhere. And from a customer experience perspective, you are likely getting that unit back up and running faster and delivering better results for them because you're using the Peloton model, right? You're connecting the expertise with kind of the leg, boots on the ground, so to say, doing the work. Healthcare is another great example where in the past, maybe we needed a specialist in every city across the country to solve certain medical issues. Perhaps now we only need a handful of them that are available to connect with patients across the country via telehealth services. So this anytime, anywhere model really changes not just how we think about solving the end business need, the customer or patient need, but it really could reinvent the business model, the labor model, the way we think about positioning our human resources and our assets to solve problems. I mentioned last mile earlier, and I think a great example of solving the last mile and being really thoughtful about location and event independence is HEB, right? So I mentioned this. I love HEB, great grocery store based here in Texas. And they've been best in class for the last 10, 20 years in terms of how they've examined their value chain and really optimized throughout and vertically integrated, right? You look at how HEB has evolved over the last few decades. They've gone from just front end retailer to producer, sourcing many of their own products, just owning their own distribution channels. They've been really smart about all through their value chain, picking where there's value for them and their customers and embracing and leaning into that. But the one place they hadn't really moved yet was beyond that retail space, right? Even up to a few years ago, their whole model was still predicated on the fact that they needed consumers to come into the store to purchase their goods. But they started to see the writing on the wall that they needed to go that last mile. They needed to change their engagement model with customers such that they could meet the customers where they were versus expecting them to come into their stores. And so in a move that almost looks like they had a crystal ball, prior to COVID, they acquired Favor, a local, localized delivery service, and made huge investments in HEB Digital to really focus on building out that front-end application, the delivery and curbside pickup capabilities. And so when the pandemic came along, they weren't caught flat-footed in thinking about how to literally deliver their goods to customers versus expecting them to come into their stores. So now you look and their application is first class in terms of capabilities. And for me as a customer, I no longer ask the question, when do I have an hour to drive to HEB and go grocery shopping? Now I just pick up my phone whenever I think about the fact that we're out of toothpaste or peanut butter or toilet paper or whatever the case may be. I add it to the list. And at some point when I'm ready, I place the order either to go pick it up or get it delivered. It's so simple, but I think it's very emblematic of what it means to look at your value chain and find where there might be gaps that you can lean into leveraging digital technologies to better serve your customers. And so now HEB's really got that anytime, anywhere model. And I think they're a great example for all of us of what it means to reinvent yourself in a way that's less dependent on physical location and timing, the way many of our industries used to be. So as we wrap up, I hope today has given you a lot to think about in terms of this new order of business, right? As we look at digital disruption, what it's doing to every industry, changing those customer expectations, changing the way that our employees want to work and interact with each other and with enterprise systems, and changing the way we think about data and the power of the platform. It really is the time for all of us to examine our value chains and look for opportunities to lean into valuable aspects that are strategically valuable, to pull back from those that may not be generating profitability for us or value for our customers, and to design that new value chain and those new experiences that really resonate with our customers and set our organizations up for the future. Put another way, we shouldn't be doing technology for technology's sake. We've got to think about it from the business strategy and value creation perspective, and then design the data and digital and process capabilities around it to support that vision. So thank you so much. I know if you're watching this now, you're watching on a recording. So if you do have any questions, I encourage you to reach out to us, certainly at sensecorp.com, but I'd welcome any personal outreach. My email is on here, mdaney@sensecorp.com. I would love to sit down and talk to you more about your digital transformation journey, or even do a workshop, half-day workshop with you and and some of your colleagues to kind of start scratching the surface on what the new order of business might be like in your industry, and how you can start taking steps towards making that vision a reality. So thank you so much, and look forward to connecting down the road.